While a fair coin should land heads up 50% of the time, as we've seen in the exercises that we just did, with small sample sizes, there is a non-trivial possibility that in a given experiment, we could flip heads on all of the tosses. For example, we calculated that there's a 3.1% chance that we'll get heads on every toss in a small 5-toss experiment. The law of large numbers states that the more experiments we run, the closer we will tend to get to the expected probability. Let's run some code now to examine this in practice. All right, since this is our first hands-on code demo together in these live lessons, I'll show you where to find the code and how to execute it. So make your way to github.com/johncrone/mlfoundations. And in here, we are in the probability and information theory part of the Machine Learning Foundation series right now. So you can click on this link here to open it up, or you can head into the notebooks directory, and all of the notebooks from the Machine Learning Foundation series are in here, and you can click on this one, the 5th subject on probability. When you open that up, you'll find yourself in the Jupyter notebook. So all of the code is executed in here. If you don't want to execute code interactively, you just want to see the code and see the outputs, all of it is available here in GitHub. And sometimes GitHub has issues with rendering. You'll get an error with loading. If you ever run into that issue, you can always go to nbviewer.jupyter.org, and you can copy and paste the URL that you'd like to open. And while GitHub, for whatever reason, can't always open the notebook properly, nbviewer.jupyter.org can. I don't know why GitHub can't do it so reliably. So everything is in here, and there's also some slight differences in here, and so particularly I'm using LaTeX to render all of the math, and for whatever reason this nbviewer website also does a better job of rendering that math. So I don't know. Worth checking out if you are planning on viewing everything statically. Despite the static viewing option being available to you, my recommendation is to execute the code interactively alongside me. That way you can change values and you can play around with the code however you'd like, become familiar with it. And the easiest way to do that is to open up the notebook in Colab. So you can click on this button here. Some students have reported issues with left-clicking in some situations. It seems rare, but there has never been a reported issue with right-clicking and opening in a new tab. That seems to work always, no matter what. All right, at the start of working on any notebook with me in the Machine Learning Foundation series, I always recommend going up to the Edit menu and selecting Clear All Outputs first. So because I have executed all of the code cells for people who are viewing things statically in GitHub, all of the outputs are already existing in the notebook. But if we're executing interactively together, we want to have the outputs show up as though they're occurring for the first time. So that Edit and Clear All Outputs will clear that. Otherwise, we're good to go. So something that's convenient in Colab is you can click on this table of contents button here, and you can see all of the parts of this notebook in sections and subsections. So we're pretty much at the top here. We're in this law of large numbers section, so you can just click on that, or you can scroll down to it. And we are going to need to execute all of the code in here. So if ever you walk away from your Colab session and you come back later and you'd like to have everything above executed, so right now we're going to be starting in the law of large numbers section here. You can click on these triangles to open up any of the sections if they're collapsed. And in order to execute all of the code above, so all of the imports, maybe this coin flip probability method that we worked through in the exercises a moment ago, you can click on where you'd like to start executing code, go up to runtime, and then run all of the cells before. So that will, execute all of the code, and it means that we can then pick up where we left off. If later on in these live lessons, you walk away from the Colab session, it'll shut down automatically after about 30 minutes or so of not interacting with the notebook. And so that's to prevent people from abusing this free resource that Google provides to us, for example, to mine Bitcoin. So in order to prevent people from mining Bitcoin for free, after about half an hour of inactivity, the session will close down. And so this kind of trick of being able to execute all of the code above in a couple of clicks will make picking up wherever you left off pretty easy. Okay, so here we are in the law of large numbers code demo. I've already talked through these points here. So let's now actually run some code to examine the law of large numbers in practice and come to understand it. So to start, we'll create a vector of exponentially increasing numbers of coin tosses per experiment. So I'm going to call this vector n's, and here are our exponentially increasing values. In order to get reproducibility between your session and mine, we can set this random seed, and that way we should get the same exact answers when we run through this. So we will discuss this binomial method in more detail later on in these live lessons. For now, it suffices to think of its two arguments as the number of coin flip experiments, that's the first argument, and the probability of throwing heads. So that's the second argument. And what it returns is then the number of flips that are heads in that particular experiment that you run. So let's say we run just one experiment. So we do one coin flip. And I'm going to be using a fair coin, so it will have a 50% chance of being heads on any given toss. Let's try that out. Okay, so on that one toss that we did, you can define this however you want. I tend to think that heads should be 1 and tails should be 0 for some reason. So if we're following that convention, then we rolled tails here. Okay, so to see the law of large numbers in action, now we'll use this same binomial method, but we'll use a list comprehension to iterate over all of the n values that we have. So we'll iterate over each of these values and continue to have a fair coin with a 50% chance of heads. And let's see what we get. So the first experiment here, we did 2 coin tosses. And what this is saying is that we got heads on both of them. In this next experiment here, we did 4 coin tosses, and we got heads on 3 of them. And so on and so on. So of course, as we increase the number of coin tosses, the bigger the number of heads that we get. And I can assure you, this is the law of large numbers itself, that as we increase the number of coin tosses that we do, the closer and closer the proportion of tosses that are heads gets to that 50% fair coin proportion. So let's plot that out. So the proportion that are heads is the heads count divided by however many coin tosses we did by the n's. So here's the proportion that are heads. So in that first experiment where we only did 2 tosses, we got heads 100% of the time. And intuitively, you probably don't find that particularly surprising. And that intuition, that is the law of large numbers in action. And we can see here that as we get to these larger numbers, the closer and closer we tend to get to 50%. And we can actually plot that out. So a simple scatter plot here of the number of coin flips in the experiment and the proportion that are heads. I've added a horizontal line here that corresponds to the expected probability. So we would expect 50% of them to be heads. And we can see down here, when we have a small number of coin flips, sometimes we're pretty far away. But as we start to have a large number of coin flips, we are reliably at that 50% mark. It is important at this juncture to address something called the gambler's fallacy. It is a common misconception that the law of large numbers dictates that if, say, 5 heads have been flipped in a row, then the probability of tails is higher on the 6th flip. In fact, probability theory holds that each coin flip is completely independent of all the others. Thus, every single individual flip of a fair coin has a 50% chance of being heads, no matter what happened on the preceding flips. To capitalize on this misunderstanding, roulette tables at casinos often have prominent displays tracking the history of red versus black roulette spins, even though there's a 47.4% chance on each and every spin of the roulette wheel, no matter what happened on preceding spins, that you'll get red or get black. It doesn't change based on what happened on previous spins, just as previous coin flips do not impact the current coin flip.